The Foreign Office has revised its travel advice in Afghanistan. It is warning all remaining UK passport holders not to travel to Kabul airport and, if they're in the area, to move away to a safer place because of an ongoing terror threat. I'm joined by our chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet, who is in Kabul. Lyse, what can you tell us about this warning to get away from Kabul airport?
Well, it's very ominous, isn't it? Coming now just less than a week before the formal end of the US military mission here in Afghanistan. It's not the first we've heard of this kind of threat. About a week ago, there were reports that there was intelligence assessments that there could be an attack on Kabul International Airport. And then President Biden began articulating that publicly and naming the local affiliate of the so-called Islamic State group, the Islamic State in Khorasan province. And, you know, viewers will say, really? They're going to attack people who are trying to flee to safety? And then you look at the record of Islamic State in Afghanistan. They have attacked maternity clinics, killed mothers just after they gave birth. I followed the story of a baby who was killed when she was 2 hours old. We've also been to the high school where the Islamic State timed their attack so they would kill as many schoolgirls as possible. Their savagery has known no bounds. And in their perverted thinking, what better way to have a spectacular attack than to hit the Americans and the Afghans in the back just as they're trying to leave? I hope it isn't the case. I really do.
But in the event of this terror threat, what you absolutely presumably have is the Taliban working with the British and other coalition American forces together.
Well, that's exactly what the United States, and in particular the United States envoy for Afghanistan reconciliation, strange title now, Zalmay Khalilzad used to talk about. He used to praise it, to say, wow, look what's happening now. The Taliban, who we're engaged in negotiations with, are working with us against our common enemy, against the Islamic State. And yes, we do think that for example, in one of their strongholds in eastern Afghanistan, in Nangarhar province, that kind of cooperation, tacit or otherwise, did take place. And I've heard from Taliban leaders myself, they do regard the Islamic State as an enemy. So in other words, they're a potential spoiler just at the moment when the Taliban are trying to make what will be a difficult transition from being an insurgency to being the government in charge across this country again, when the eyes of the world and Afghans are on them.
But right now, if there is this terror threat, Lyse, then this is going to affect the timetable for the last flights out of Afghanistan, because of course people are being sent away from the airport, people are not getting in presumably at the moment, so that is going to disrupt that even more.
It's hard to imagine what can disrupt this process anymore. In the first place, President Joe Biden, who was called personally from Boris Johnson, other Western leaders, who he may even call friends, they begged him to delay the departure so that you could get more people taken out to safety from Afghanistan. President Biden wouldn't budge. And the thousands of people who see this window closing, who are desperate to take advantage of what they see as one of their last chances to leave this country, some of them clearly at risk, others just trying to take advantage of this situation to say, well, this may be my one chance to leave this country for my children to have a better life. They're not going to be reading, they're probably not even going to hear of advisories from the British Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. They're going to make their way to the airport. Sadly, this is a country where the dangers are so many that people just keep their eye on what matters to them most of all.
Lyse, thanks so much for joining us. Well, it is hard for many of us to imagine the fear thousands of Afghans will be experiencing tonight as the hours tick down, surely understanding that their chances of leaving Kabul are decreasing fast, if without papers they ever had a chance in the first place. 2,000 Afghans with papers are still there, but it's unclear where they are, whether they're in the vicinity of the airport, which, as we've just reported, is now deemed unsafe because of an ongoing terror threat, or still hiding in the city, and whether they could make it through the Taliban's checkpoints anyway. So how many hours are there left before the last planes of refugees leave Kabul ahead of the 31st of August? The coalition is deliberately not saying, so concerned are they about panic. The US preparations are already underway, and before they pull out, the British military and others will have left the runway. Here is David Grossman with his assessment of the practicalities which will dominate the remaining days.
Driving an American truck bought for the Afghan police by the US military, the Taliban patrol the streets around Kabul airport. It is by their agreement and their permission that the evacuations continue. And they want the world to believe that they are in a generous mood.
We forgive everyone. Anyone who made problems in the past, even the military, everyone is forgiven.
The Pentagon today claimed they had a flight leaving Kabul every 39 minutes. But for how much longer? Today, the US military confirmed that for the final few days, it will concentrate on evacuating its own personnel.
We will have to reserve some capacity in those last couple of days to prioritize the military footprint leaving, because we want to be able to keep it there as long as possible to do the job that it's intended to do.
That means that in those final few days, the US and UK will be increasingly dependent on the agreement with the Taliban. NATO's retreat will be guarded by their enemies standing behind a barricade of luggage trolleys.
Things could change very dramatically, very quickly. But I believe that if the Taliban's understanding with the United States holds, and they do provide the security parameter around the airport, which they have done now, and the people who have amassed there are largely people who amassed for some days now, it's not going to be a repeat of the scenes that we saw in the first couple of days when everything collapsed there. But again, as I said, Afghanistan is quite unpredictable. And I think more than anything, that sense of abandonment amongst those Afghans, one could only imagine, is quite palpable.
That means, though, that the Taliban are deciding who gets into the airport, and we get glimpses of their methods. The UK's definition of who qualifies for evacuation comes nowhere near covering all those who believe they should be offered protection.
Hello, sir.
I spoke to someone in Kabul we're calling Salim. He's 17. His older brother, who worked for the British military, is now safely in the UK. Salim told me that he and the rest of the family have been refused help and are terrified. We've revoiced his words to protect his identity.
Just my brother is in the UK and we are in Afghanistan. Our life is in danger. We would like to go, our whole family, but we can't. We tried to get to the airport, but we couldn't.
You don't believe the Taliban when they say that there will be no reprisals?
No, we don't believe the Taliban. We tried to change our location every time because Taliban are searching home by home for Afghan government employees and for UK government employees. They are killing their families if they don't find the persons who were UK and US employees.
Bureaucracies work on lists, and the chaos of Kabul defies neat categorization. But outside the capital, the uncertainty is even worse. Little by way of reliable information emerges.
People are very confused as to what's going to happen, because for them also, as they follow the news, the international media and the wider lens just happens to be on the story of the airport. And the local media has predominantly collapsed, or they're incredibly cautiously reporting so as to not upset the new Taliban regime. So as far as I have gathered, people are feeling relieved that sense of kind of calmness has come. But obviously, that doesn't mean security in every sense.
The UN agency UNICEF is one of the few international organisations still working outside Kabul. While NATO concentrates on the August 31st deadline, it's clear this nation's problems will continue much longer and go well beyond the airport.
That is the airport. That is one small part of Kabul, and across the country, the humanitarian needs are immense. We have got many people in camps for internally displaced people. I visited a camp yesterday in Kabul and saw many families who had fled with nothing, and they are in a state of despair. They are exhausted. They don't know what is going to happen next.
Tonight, the US Secretary of State did his best to sound resolute.
Let me be crystal clear about this. There is no deadline on our work to help any remaining American citizens who decide they want to leave to do so, along with the many Afghans who have stood by us over these many years.
But how much is this just for US domestic consumption? How much impact will it have in an increasingly desperate Afghanistan? Once the military leave, is this country pretty much on its own?